Democrats. Oh, my God, they're such whiners. Yes. So there were a couple of left-wing people who said some crazy things that got elected. And now 98.8% of the rest of the Democratic Party is melting down and saying, we're doomed. And that's making headlines. That's might hurt fundraising. I know you know this, and I know you'll remember this. I just want to take everybody back to 2020. Joe Biden finished in 4th place in Iowa. A bunch of white progressives kicked him around all across Iowa and beat him. He finished in 4th. And then he goes to New Hampshire. He finishes in 5th. Again, white progressives voted him down, kicked him around. I just went back and I looked at all the stories. Blood in the water, wrote Politico on February the 12th. 2020. Leaders left and right, who I will not embarrass now, all saying the campaign's over. He's old. He's pathetic. There's no way he's going to win. I mean, Biden's own team completely shattered. And that's because, well, white progressives had their say, and they should have their say. They need to have their say because that's part of the Democratic Party. I'm not saying shun anybody. We need everybody. If we want a Democratic Party and independents and others pushing back against anti-democratic forces. But Joe Biden went on to win South Carolina the next week, and he steamrolled over everybody as 99.8% of black Democratic primary voters who had not had their say in those first 2 states had their say and proved once again, people aren't going to want to hear this, that the heart and soul of the Democratic Party is moderate. And that's why you had Joe Biden standing on a stage with 16 progressives, or people playing progressive in 2020, and ended up crushing the field. Jim, I will throw it over to you. Please tell the whiners to stop whining, to get together and get back to work.
Joe, I think a little bit of Reverend Al's preaching rubbed off on you back there. I totally agree with you. You should continue to preach this because you're right. Let's just talk about the data for a second. 60-some% of Democrats identify as either moderate or conservative. This is a party that is right in the mainstream, and we continue to focus on every little thing that goes wrong here in our panic because we can't believe we've lost to Donald Trump twice. But if you look at who's actually winning these elections, look at the last year's governor's races. I know it seems like forever ago, but we won Virginia and New Jersey by over 10 points in both places with moderate, mainstream Democratic women candidates who did what? They talked about the economy. They talked about the actual issues that matter to voters, grocery prices and gas prices, those things. And that's how we win elections. What I really care about and what the polling is really showing right now is that voters want to hear us talk about mainstream issues, about how to make their lives a little bit better. And when we do that, we will win elections in November. We will take the House. And surprisingly, we have a shot at taking the Senate because of these issues. We just have to stay focused on the actual voters and stop having this primary inside our party. We'll have time for that next year. It's called a presidential primary. We can have all these ideological debates. But for the next 108 days, we have to stay focused on actual voters and what we can do to make their lives better.
So, Jim, how does that play out in the Senate races in, say, what's happened in Maine and what's happened is happening right now in Michigan? Because I'm sure both of those candidates, Platner in the past and Abu Sayed up in Michigan right now, would be arguing, yeah, we are talking about those kitchen table issues. We are talking about health care for all. Certainly that's kind of, in the Michigan case, that's Abu Sayed's whole platform. They are responding to what voters want to talk about, but I imagine what you're thinking is they are not the way that Democrats can win those Senate seats.
I agree. Well, first of all, Haley Stevens is going to win in Michigan. She worked for me in the White House, one of the best humans I've ever dealt with in American public service, and I think she's going to win that race because she's focused on the bread and butter issues. I think the problem, Katty, is when candidates spend too much time talking about ideology and talking about, DSA and all this stuff, you lose voters. Voters want to hear exactly what you're going to do to make their medical prices cheaper, make your gas prices cheaper, and make your grocery prices cheaper. And I think that's the problem with this fight in the Democratic Party. When it becomes too ideological and not about voters, I think you lose voters.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, John Heilemann, when New York had its primaries, everybody was talking about the shock of all shocks. Progressives win progressive seats. In some cases, progressives who say really crazy things that probably shouldn't have been endorsed by New York's mayor. I say probably is doing a lot there. Should not have been endorsed by New York's mayor, but he's free to do whatever he wants to do, and he's doing pretty well for himself. So that's his choice. But on that same day, in South Carolina won. You had the Democrats pick an admiral who had been fired by Pete Hegseth, probably because she's a woman. She is a strong candidate in the one seat in South Carolina that Democrats can win. Mike Lawler in upstate New York, a guy who's on the bubble in, I think, a Biden-Harris district. Who did he draw? He drew a Democrat who is a war hero, who won 3 Bronze Stars, who did 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and again is the sort of Democrat, well, as Jim Messina said, that won the governorship in Virginia and in New Jersey just last year. So, yeah, they're going to be progressives winning progressive seats. They're going to be moderates winning in places that require moderate candidates. And this shouldn't be seen as radical. It shouldn't be seen as an opportunity for people to try to tear the party apart so they can get a few more hits on their social media platforms.
Right. And I think, Joe, and those kinds of that kind of analysis, which is sort of the what the British like to think of as horses for courses, right? Where, you look at a district and they're across the ideological spectrum, there are different kinds of candidates that fit well with different kinds of districts. And the kind of a congressperson who can win in the Bronx is going to be different from a congressperson who might be competitive in South Carolina or in upstate New York or in a lot of other places. Donnie, where things get complicated is when you get to a state like Michigan, where first of all, they get more complicated statewide in general. So you're trying to win a whole state, especially trying to win in a purple state where there's a lot of ideological diversity. There's an activist base of the party that primarily in some of the urban areas that's very animated and very active. There's also a much more moderate part of the party that the Democratic electorate more broadly, not at the base, but just who might vote in a Senate race that stretches all the way up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and all the way to Lake Michigan. And that complicates things in terms of a primary. But also the further thing is something that Joseph Scarborough talks about all the time and that we talk about on this show, which is about the important factor of who's the better political athlete. And in some cases, you get in a situation where, Jim, I'm not trying to diss Haley Stevens here when I say this, but the ideological profile of Haley Stevens is probably a better ideological profile for the swing state of Michigan.
Yes.
But at least from what we've seen so far, Abdul El-Sayed is a better political athlete than Haley Stevens, at least so far in this campaign. Haley Stevens has come alive a little bit in that debate that we saw. But by and large, part of the thing with El-Sayed has not been he's run a very ideological campaign, but he's also just a better political performer than she has been so far. So how do you see that shaking out, not just in Michigan, but more broadly in races that Democrats must win if they're going to take control of the United States Senate in November?
Let me wind it back a little bit. Joe, you referred to the whiners. Guilty as charged. Whiner right over here, okay? And my concern is not necessarily even for this election. It's going forward. When you look at 60% of young people think socialism is a good thing. I mean, you got to work back from, what the people want, what the people are saying. And also to John Heilemann's point, a lot of the energy, a lot of the great political athletes are some of these DSA candidates. So I believe it is the future of the party. It may not be upon us tomorrow, but I just think that's where it's going.
It's not the future. It's a snapshot right now. And I want to keep you in this conversation, but I want to bring Jim Messina in, too. Hey, Jim, let's talk about this for a second. Everybody's looking at polls saying, oh, the majority of Democrats hate Israel. Oh, the majority of Democrats are socialist, young people. You know what? We're in a void right now And with all due respect to Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, they ain't in the woods of Hank Williams setting the woods on fire. Nobody's going to be inspired or influenced by them if there's a presidential candidate that comes out and explains why American capitalism, when there are boundaries put around it, why American capitalism has worked for this country as well as it has, and they can do it in a strong, powerful way like Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, those numbers will start changing. It always happens. A party moves to whoever its leader is, and right now the Democratic Party's biggest problem is it just doesn't have a leader. It's rudderless right now, and you can't look to Capitol Hill, with all due respect to those leaders there, for the type of leadership that would fill this void, Jim.
I totally agree, Joe. I think that's exactly right. I just met with my 29th person who's considering running for president of the United States. And it is amazing. It is the deepest field I've ever seen. We have amazing candidates from governorships to Senate races, even House people, a couple of business people. We are going to have this primary, and we're going to pick a nominee who's going to unite the party. Democrats are a little bit different than Republicans in that we like to govern and we like to win. And your example of Joe Biden is exactly the right example. We danced with the leftist candidates. They got us all excited. We danced in Michigan or in Iowa. Then we went to New Hampshire, and then the entire party, literally in one weekend, said, "Nope, we want to win. We want to beat Donald Trump. We're picking Joe Biden." And I think people are underestimating Democrats in this as they bring people together. We're going to pick a nominee who can unite this party, and we have the best field I've seen in a very long time to do it.